What's up everybody? In this video, I'm going to show you how to take the awesome 2D terrain tiles you get from Warcrow Winds from the North and turn it into 3D terrain pieces that you can use in all sorts of war games. Specifically, this video, I'm making it for Warcrow. So let's just relax a little bit and jump into it. All right, so what I start off doing is I have my 2D pieces, and so I take some 3mm MDF and I start tracing all of the templates. These are going to act as the bases for all of the terrain pieces, and so I needed two different two different MDF squares, and you'll notice I try to keep them all identical to the template except for the circle, which I keep a little oblong just because I don't like the perfect circles. And with some extra space, I ended up making some other templates, but I don't end up using them. Anyway, I use them in a different way later on in the video, you'll see. So now the MDF bases are all sanded and kind of eroded down so the sides are smooth. And so what you're going to see me start doing now is I start to mark off kind of where I want some of these pieces to be, and I really tried to mimic the placement on the actual 2D elements. And so obviously once I get to the painting and sand step, this stuff will get covered. But as I work and plan out now, it's nice to just kind of have an idea. And I went a little excessive with some of the trees. I had a lot of these little small trees. But yeah, so I moved on to the rocks, just kind of shaped all that stuff. If you are interested in how I made any of like the trees or stuff like that, just let me know. But once we move on, now it's time to start building some 3D parts to the actual terrain. So I use DOS sculpting clay, air dry sculpting clay, and I use this to kind of make a ring around the pond so that I can actually fill it with the resin, which you'll see me do towards the end of the video. I got this idea from Black Magicraft. He has a really awesome channel, so feel free to go and check it out. But you mix it with, I use the water because it helps really smooth it out, helps make sure you have a barrier. And then for the rocks, I just use pine bark. This is like I got it from Home Depot, so any lumber store or whatever you want to use. And you can cut it down. I'm using like a micro saw and a hot glue gun. I just want this to be fast and quick, this whole project, so I pretty much use the hot glue gun for the whole project. But they have all different awesome shapes, and so you can use the pine bark straight from the bag. A lot of times it's really humid, so I like to just make sure that there is enough, it's dry. So you can bake it in the oven, just make sure you monitor it. I don't remember off the top of my head what the right temperatures are, but once it's ready for you, once you're happy with how it is, make sure there's no bugs or anything on it. It makes a pretty awesome rock texture, and you'll see how it comes out. It really takes well to dry brushing, so you'll see how that texture really gets pulled out once you use once you get to the dry brushing stage. All right, so remember those pieces I had extras of? I actually ended up breaking them up because this MDF is really only 3mm thick. So I wanted to make sure I had a little bit of height so that when those trees do get kind of drilled down, they have some depth to go into. So I pulled the DOS back out again, and I just kind of made these little simple hills. You can use acrylic putty or epoxy or this air dry clay. I don't know if you want to buy like the little kids puffy air dry clay. I don't know how that would work. But I glued the little chunks of MDF down with hot glue, and then I just did the same thing I did with the pond, with kind of sculpting it, laying it where I want, and then just using water and my finger to kind of smooth it out. The 3mm MDF does warp a little bit, so if I were to do this in the future, I probably would double up the MDF, so just keep that in mind. And so here I have a bunch of pink insulation foam, which you can also get from the hardware store. And this is how I kind of made my walls. If you're curious about how I made all the textured bricks, I really just I used my Proxxon wire cutter and I cut up the bricks into different sizes. I have some squares for kind of the floor texture, and then I have some more brick shaped tiles for other parts of the ruins. So I really just kind of laid them down. I wanted this to be really quick. So I just use hot glue again. But you can use tacky glue. It would probably work. It'd probably hold a lot nicer. But like I said, this is supposed to be kind of a quick project for me to do so that I can get them ready. So I can get these terrain pieces ready for demos. And I can get it out by the time the game is ready for Warcrow is ready for pre-order. So here I'm making the ruins. As you can see, the template on the top, it's I try to mimic it. You know, you kind of have 2 floors, some sort of wall piece, and a pillar. So I just kind of toy around with it. I do burn myself quite a few times with the hot glue gun, so just be careful. I have quite a few hobby burns from the hot glue gun. But as you can see, you know, after a little bit of sculpting and detail, you know, excessive detail-oriented fixes, I kind of have something I'm happy with. And like many of the other tiles, they overlap quite well. So now that I have everything kind of ready, I go in with some PVA glue. This is just Elmer's PVA glue, watered down a little bit just to help it flow better. And I spread it all over the different pieces to use with sand. Now, in the past, I have heard that it is better to wet the MDF first, just like with your finger in some water, because the MDF actually has a hard time getting things to stick to it. I was planning to do this, I forgot to do it, and then I remembered to do it after I had already based everything. So if I were to do it again, I would do that step. But this is just some playground sand that I bought from Home Depot or any hardware store. And what I ended up doing with it is I used just a strainer from like a kitchen. I have one specifically for this. And I strained out all the coarser rocks and minerals and sand. So it's a lot more finer. And so I just spread it around. You know, I hit all the pieces. Obviously don't put the glue where you want the, you know, where you don't want glue to be. So like on the rocks and stuff, on the ruins. And you just kind of spread it around to get it on there. Shake it off a little bit, and then you just let it dry for whatever the dry time is for Elmer's glue. I always like to let it dry a little extra, just so I can be super sure that it's ready to go. So here's all of the templates, 3D templates. The base is ready to go, and they all line up kind of good with their original templates. So now the next stage is just kind of looking at these wooden barricades. So I had made some a long time ago, like 2014, for the Lord of the Rings game, back when I played that. But I wanted to kind of update it a little bit, and so I start with a dowel rod, just from Home Depot. I really don't remember what the width is. They're just thin. And I use my micro saw and my normal saw to kind of just cut grooves into the side of it to kind of replicate some of that bark. There's other things you can do to make it have texture, but like I said, this is supposed to be a quick project. And so I kind of measure out how long I want these to be. I'll want them to be, you know, around the same length. And I have Drago the Anvil there as my kind of measurement guide for a person. And then I use the hobby tool, my X-Acto knife, and I just kind of crudely cut, because I like to think these fortifications were kind of quickly made with axes. And so, you know, you don't want to use like a pencil sharpener or anything. And you get these nice little crude spikes, which are spiky. I have poked myself with them quite a few times, so just be careful. So now that I have kind of cut all of my little spikes, I'm ready to start posing them and kind of, you know, putting them how I want. So I end up going with two different structures that are identical. And ultimately I end up just using the hot glue. Once again, tacky glue could be a better idea for you, but like I said, quick project, so I was really working. And I go back and forth with the elevation until eventually I kind of get it exactly where I want it, which is kind of low. And you'll see at the end product that really is still kind of high for me, but it works. This is my least favorite of all of the terrain pieces, but I'm still happy with how it ended up looking. That was a nice challenge. And with many of the different pieces here, as I've kind of mentioned already, I'm trying to get back into terrain making, because this is what I really loved about the hobby. So I'm kind of forcing myself to try out different things that I've seen on YouTube videos, and I like to watch all the different terrain videos from all these wonderful creators on YouTube, because it's just kind of relaxing for me. That's my favorite part about the hobby, is all the terrain and texturing and basing minis. So I'm really just trying stuff out. All right, so here's my kind of end result. It's like 95% done. I end up going back and chopping off kind of those bottom pieces. I make them a little shorter. But we're finally here. We've got everything ready. We've got everything prepped. So now we use some matte Mod Podge and some black paint. I probably went a little heavier on the Mod Podge, but the Mod Podge acts as a sealer, and the black paint is just a coat of paint. So mixing them together makes a nice kind of solid coat. I picked this idea up from Black Magic Craft once again, but there are quite a few other creators on YouTube that I know use this kind of combo. And so all I really do is you just paint it around. You want to make sure you go a little light with it because it can be thick, so the gloppiness of it can take away from the sandy details and all the nice little fine details. So you really just have a mixture up to yourself, you know, how thick you want it to be. Like I said, I'm trying to get back into the game of terrain making, so I'm just kind of winging it. And that's kind of really, I get so hell-bent on details all the time that it was kind of nice to just kind of mixing things and putting things together quickly, because I ultimately am happy with the results of them. So everything's Mod Podged, it's all dried. Now we get to the painting stuff. So I had seen in the past a few creators use hobby paints. These are just Craft Smart, the cheapest possible hobby paints I got from Michaels. And I've seen people use them in their airbrushes, and I've heard they're prone to clogging. I knew it would probably end up happening, but I just wanted to try it out. So I thinned these paints with my super cheap thinner, which I just buy on Amazon. It's like US Air Supply or something. And I wanted to see how it worked. So I took just a generic brown color and I just kind of went to town on all these pieces. I really wanted to see what it looked like. And actually, as you can see, it sprayed pretty well. Because I used so much thinner, the paints ended up being fairly transparent, but it actually ended up being nice because I ended up getting this really nice gradient of some dark and some light browns just from this one color and the Mod Podge background. And I did end up using another paint, just a lighter brown, like a golden brown or something. But what ended up happening was it was so transparent that it was barely noticeable. But ultimately, if you have an airbrush, try it out. The airbrush clogged after I got the last piece done, or while I was doing the last piece. So I was like, I'm not going to do this anymore for the stones. So I just did it for the ground, and it was actually pretty cool. I'm pretty happy I tried this out. I may do it again in the future, but I would only suggest doing this if you have like a big batch of stuff to do, because I do recommend, my airbrush was ready for cleaning. So I did it right before it needed to get cleaned out. So like I said, I didn't airbrush the stones or the rocks, so I ended up painting them just the old-fashioned way with a brush. I picked up a cool idea from the train tutor a while ago on putting some yellows into the gray, so you don't just have a flat gray stone, and it actually makes the stones look a little bit more realistic. And so a long time ago I did a really cool build where I really kind of went crazy with the pine bark style, and it looked really cool. So I wanted to see if I could remember it and bring it back. And if you're interested in me doing another build where I make these big rocky outcroppings with this style, just let me know. So here we can see I have, the pond piece. I did paint it blue. That was just with a brush. I just went in with just some blues and just kind of mixed them around, and then I put a little drop of black in the middle of it. That just creates depth. Yeah, so you can see kind of the final airbrush and flat stone colors. So now I kind of go into dry brush. Dry brush is probably one of my favorite steps in terrain making, and I use Slap Chop Plus for my miniature making, and dry brushing is kind of the key part of that. And so all you're really doing is you're taking your different paints and you're using a brush, and instead of adding water, you're just dabbing your brush on the palette, in the paint, and then drying it off on either a dry brush palette or good old paper towels. So, I just start mixing these craft paints. Like I said, I was specifically trying to not be super detailed and OCD about this, just because I can get that way and it can kind of stop my projects from continuing on. So I was just kind of mixing some paints. These are just some lighter browns. It took me a while with the browns to finally get a color that kind of pulled the shadows back and hold up the highlights, but eventually I settled with like a very bright, I think it's like golden brown or something, from Craft Smart, a very bright or very light colored brown. But as you can see, it starts pulling out the colors, and when I compare it, you can see there's definitely some texture visible there. So then I go on to paint all of the tiles, all of these terrain pieces that way. So now you're going to have a lot of different temperature, different gradients with the airbrushing and the dry brushing. And so now I go back to my dry brushing for the stones, and I wanted to try out the yellow. I went a little heavy with the yellow, and I was worried about how it would look, but you'll see it actually, I think it looks actually pretty cool. You get definitely get some slightly warmer gray stones with this style. Then I use like a vanilla. I was just looking for a light color, and I ended up not even adding more gray. I just used that. And I go in with a smaller dry brush, and I just lightly hit up all the corners and edges, and you end up with this really nice highlighted stone. I'm actually very, very happy with that. Making stones, I think, are one of my favorite things to do. I don't know why, but it is. So you notice there's stones, but there's also ruins, and I didn't want them to look identical. So I said, well, what the heck? What if I ignore my yellow idea with the stone and I add blues? And so I ended up mixing this to be a bit more of cooler ruins, and I ended up getting these nice, colder looking stone, which was really nice. And so you can see here, one uses blues, one uses yellows, and you get a cooler tone and a warmer tone. So we're back to the palisades, or the stone barricades, and I dry brushed them with just one of those gray mixes I had from when I dry brushed the stones. Makes it look like older wood. I didn't want to go too crazy with this. And they're just, I think they were spray painted with like a Rust-Oleum Espresso or something, just a brown spray paint. And then I just took some twine or rope, really thin rope that I just happened to find in my tools closet, and I wanted to kind of wrap them around these palisades. So one, it looks like they are tied together. They're not just hanging around, but two, it secretly hides the glue blobs, especially when you use hot glue. So I wasn't too worried about it. So I kind of pulled them out. I, threaded them through, and then when I was done, I super glued it, let it dry, and then I cut off the ends. So now you have these nice little palisades. So like I said, I ended up with 2 palisades, or 2 wooden barriers, and now we get to the tacky glue step. So now this is where all the terrain pieces start to really come together and start to come into their own. You will notice, if you can see the eagle-eyed view, super glue can kind of stain the wood white a little bit. It's not the end of the world for me, but if you really don't like that, I'd use tacky glue once again. And so there you go. So that's kind of the first piece done. Don't worry, we go back and add some grasses and stuff. And so now those grasses, we're gonna get some of that good clump foliage. So I like to use, this is the Woodland Scenics clump foliage. There's all different colors, as you can see. I like to use the light green ones here. It just really pops, and less is more. So I always get a little carried away, but I was really planning to kind of go nuts with it, and then I was like, no, I don't think so. And it ended up looking much nicer with less of them. And this really allows you to go in and kind of cover up any glue spots or spots where sand didn't cover, or just these weird spots, so you can kind of get that nice clump foliage look. I didn't do flock either. I just didn't want to. The last step before we are all done is our pond. So I have this 2-part fast curing resin. I found it on Amazon. You have to do a 1-to-1 mix. So I just have these 2 really cheap small cups. I bought a big set of them for resin pouring at like Walmart, and you mix them together and it starts to activate, and it has a pretty long work time, I would say. And you'll see me add just a little bit more because there's some residual of it left in the other cup. So I use Army Painter's new Fanatics paints. I think this is Abyssal Blue. If I could go back, I'd use maybe 1 or 2 drops. I used 3 here, and it was a bit too much. It's still a little bit transparent. You can just barely see the depth, but it worked. So What I do now is I just kind of spread it around. I pull up the resin along the edges, and then I hit it with a lighter so that it can heat up all of the bubbles and, you know, make sure that it doesn't dry with bubbles. Make sure there's no hair in it, and then I cover it up and I'm gonna let it sit now. All right, and here are the final products of all of these terrain elements. So we have the pond, the wooden barricades on spikes, the ruins, the small rock pile, the larger rock pile, and then finally the trees, which I once again apologize for not being able to show you how to make them. My storage was full on my phone and it stopped recording when I thought it was recording. So here's one of them. Here's the other medium piece. Finally, here is the last larger forest piece. Now, some obvious downsides, especially with forests, for the 2D tiles to 3D tiles, is that in 3D, if you have a unit and they're in the forest, you know, and you want to measure it around, you're limited here by the trees. So you can't obviously put a guy on top of the trees, stuff like that. That's one of the benefits of 2D terrain. And if you're interested in me going over the pros and cons of 2D terrain versus 3D terrain, let me know. But for me, I love the immersion of the literally having your guys in a forest. And so I love the 3D terrain, even if it does kind of remove some of that mobility. Tournaments, I can see it being better to have the 2D terrain, or best scenario in both worlds, you lay the 2D terrain underneath the 3D terrain and you just lift up the 3D terrain when it gets there. So there you have it. Let's recap everything and finish up this video. Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed this video. I know there was kind of a lot of stuff going on. This is kind of my first time getting back into making terrain making, and for the first time filming it. And, you know, with these double-sided terrain tiles, there's all different types of things. We got forests, we got rocks, we got ruins, we got wooden barricades, and we got the pond. And the pond has water effects, which is a whole other thing. But if you're interested in having me kind of deep dive a little bit more into like how to make the ruins or how to make some more of those pine bark rock tiles, or just any rocks or anything like that, just let me know down in the comments. I'd be more than happy to kind of show you some of the different things that I can make and kind of describe it a little better. But yeah, thanks for watching. Feel free to subscribe, that'd be awesome, and like this video. And I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.